the United States Institute of Peace. I want to thank you for inviting me here, listening to my views about Pakistan, Pakistan's policy. And I start with how someone like me, a sportsman for 20 years, international sportsman who ended up in politics. I'm the first generation Pakistani. My parents were born in colonial India. I was the first generation who grew up in an independent Pakistan. We grew up with a lot of pride. My parents reminded me always how awful it was to live in a colonial, in a country where you didn't have your freedom. So I valued the freedom of being in an independent country. And we took great pride when Pakistan started growing rapidly in the 60s. It's not used to my voice, I think it's too heavy for me. In the 60s, Pakistan was the fastest growing country in the whole region. Pakistan was a country which gave us hope. We grew up feeling that this is a country with a destiny. And then things started going wrong from 70s onwards. And I was playing cricket for 2 decades, international sports, when I finished in the early 90s. And my initial thought after playing sport was to go into social work. I had already started building a cancer hospital. My mother had died of cancer. And I realized that there was no cancer hospital in Pakistan, so I thought I would build one, specifically because poor people cannot afford cancer treatment. So I spent 6-7 years of my life after cricket building and then running the hospital. But it was during that time I realized that this is a big country. Social work was not going to change it. The only way it would change our country is joining politics. Change only comes through when you head a government and bring about a change. And the reason why I joined politics was because I realized our politics was going in a direction which was leading Pakistan to nowhere. Problem with most ex-colonial countries was exactly what Pakistan was facing. If you look at Africa, you look at the independence movements in Africa, and then the leaders who came from the independence movement, once they assumed government, a similar pattern took place. The moment they got power, they used power for benefiting themselves. Corruption was the main reason why countries could not reach their potential. And Pakistan was exactly that country which in 60s, while was taking off, from mid-80s onwards, it started going down because of corruption of the ruling elite. So when I formed my party in 1996, it was on an anti-corruption platform. And I campaigned for 15 years in the political wilderness, talking about corruption, and could not make people understand the relevance, the relation between corruption and poverty. People could not relate the two. Somehow in ex-colonial countries, people thought taking money from the government was nothing wrong with it, because it was not your government. It was a foreign government which was ruling over you. So if you evaded taxes, there was, you were not doing anything wrong. And similarly, corruption. So I formed my party, as I said, in 1996. For 15 years, I had only a few people with me, and no one thought I had a chance. But then suddenly, people began to understand what I was saying. So the party then began to take off about 7 years ago. And in 2013, we formed government in one of the 4 provinces. And because of our performance in that one performance, in that one province in 2018, we won the elections. So what has been the main challenge since we've come to power 10 months ago? Number one challenge was inheriting a country which was bankrupt. We had the biggest current account and fiscal deficits. But worse, what corruption does is it's not just a question of bankrupting a country and money being laundered out of the country. What happens is the ruling elites, when they make money, when they make money out of corruption, they then have to take it out of the country, because otherwise people would ask them questions, where did the money come from? So you suffer in two ways. Number one, the money which should go to human development ends up going into people's pockets. But secondly, that money leaves the country. And in my opinion, which I spoke to President Trump yesterday, the biggest problem that the world faces is about $1 trillion leaving developing and poor countries and either going into offshore accounts, or they end up in Western countries. And this is impoverishing, this is causing more deaths than through terrorism, than through drugs. The amount of people dying of hunger and disease, lack of education, not having clean drinking water, is because of the ruling elites and developing world taking that money out and parking it into, as I said, offshore accounts or Western countries. So we faced a similar situation. We had the biggest current account deficit and fiscal deficit. But the other aspect of corruption is that in order for the ruling elites to take money out, they have to destroy the state institutions. Because if the institutions are strong, they would not be able to take the money out. For instance, if your anti-corruption body is strong, if your justice system is working, is robust, if your taxation department, like equivalent to the Indian revenue here or the IRS here, if these institutions are strong, you cannot take money out of the country. But that's the biggest damage these corrupt ruling elites do to developing world. They destroy these institutions. So, you can recover the money, but what you can't, to build institutions takes time. So the biggest challenge we have faced since we've been in power is trying to build the state institutions. And we have succeeded, we have turned around various institutions, but it is a slow process. The relationship which we've had with our neighbors, the other priority we have tried to instill in Pakistan amongst the people is that we must have good relationship with all our neighbors. Because Pakistan at the moment, most of all, needs stability. We need stability for economic progress. We need peace. And so for peace, we need to have a good relationship with our neighbors. So first was me trying to reach out to India. India is, a country which we've had turbulent relationship with. But unfortunately, because of one issue of Kashmir, whenever we have tried, whenever relationship has started to move in the right direction with India, some incident happens, and that's all related to Kashmir, we go back to square one. And so I reached out to my counterpart in India, the Indian Prime Minister, assured him that, we towards us, we will go 2 steps towards you, because the biggest problem India and Pakistan face is poverty. And the best way we can reduce poverty is if we start trading with each other. The next was Afghanistan. We again have had a difficult relationship with Afghanistan. And so We have reached out. I have invited President Ghani to Pakistan. And, it's a sort of long story, but we are moving towards, fortunately, we are all moving towards the same direction. There's a convergence now in Pakistan, in the US, that there is no military solution in Afghanistan. So we are all working towards the peace process. Similarly with Iran, we've had sort of a decent relationship with Iran without, it's not really a warm relationship, but a decent relationship with them. So we reached out to all our neighbors. And the next is the US. US is a superpower. You have to have good relationship with the US, whether you like it or not. So I was a bit worried when I was invited to meet President Trump. I've been in limelight, public life for 40 years. And sort of when I've gone to meet people who are famous or well-known or in power, you normally get advice that, what you should do, what questions you should ask when you meet them. But never in my life have I had so many suggestions before I was going to meet President Trump. Inundated. And I have to say that it was one of the most pleasant surprise, not just for me, for my delegation. The way, the hospitality, the way he, straightforward, charming way he treated us, so we were all blown over. We loved the meeting with the president yesterday. But above all, we decided on how we will now have a close relationship between Pakistan and the US. How we will now ensure that there is no communication gap. The period from 2003 or 4 to 2015 was the worst in the relationship between Pakistan and the US. Pakistanis felt that they were fighting the US war. It was, no Pakistani was involved in 9/11. Taliban were in Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda was in Afghanistan, but Pakistan ended up involved in that war, and we lost 70,000 people. We lost over $100 billion lost to our economy. And yet, there was mistrust. Pakistan felt it was doing its best. It could have stayed out of the war, and yet Pakistan participated in the war, and Pakistan took a battering. There was a point when people like us thought, are we going to survive? Because there were suicide bombs going on every day. There were no sports team used to visit Pakistan, forget about investors. And so we passed through a terrible period, but at the same time, the US thought we weren't doing enough. We were playing a double game. So that was, in my opinion, the worst, it was the worst phase between the relationship between US and Pakistan. I was one of those, and I came here, I think in 2009, and I tried to explain to people here that there was no military solution in Afghanistan. I met, then Democrats hadn't come into power, the elections hadn't happened just before President Obama won the elections. I tried to explain I had a meeting organized, there's Dr. Ikram here, he organized a meeting with Joe Biden, John Kerry, Harry Reid, towering figures of the Democratic Party. And I sat there and tried to explain to them the history of Afghanistan, of Pakistan's tribal area, and tried to explain to them that there will be no military solution. But I realized they had no idea. People in the US had no idea about the history of Afghanistan and the sort of conflict they had got involved in. And fortunately, this time, everyone knows, people understand. So why do I think that we will now have the very best of relationship with the US? Because we are all on the same page. Previously, Pakistan army was supposedly fighting for the US, this war on terror, but the US did not think we were doing enough. And in Pakistan, we thought we had gone out of our way. This time, the Pakistan state, our security forces, the United States, all of us are on the same page. That peace in Afghanistan can only take place through a political settlement, through dialogue. So we are all now working on getting the Taliban to talk to the Afghan government. They're already talking to the US, and we hope that this will eventually lead to a settlement. Not easy. It's not going to be easy, because there's no centralized Taliban command. It's a devolved movement. But we feel that if we all work together, we feel this is the best chance of there to be peace in Afghanistan. Apart from that, domestically, just one final word before I take your questions. I've struggled these 23 years to get into power. Most of the, as I said, in wilderness, political wilderness. I was not fighting political parties. I felt I was fighting a mafia. And the Supreme Court of Pakistan, actually, when there was this famous court case where the Prime Minister was dismissed, actually called the ruling party a Sicilian mafia. And I say a mafia because this is not normal politics. Because the two ruling families had been in power off and on for 30 years. And when you are in power for 30 years, their penetration was right down in the bureaucracy, in the judiciary, in the election commission. They had enormous amounts of money. And so we won because we mobilized the people. We mobilized the youth of Pakistan. We were very fortunate that Pakistan has 60% of Pakistanis are below the age of 30. They became our big support. The young people rallied around us. And it was the biggest public movement in Pakistan in the last 50 years. And so we won despite having, coming up against big money, despite the penetration in media, the most vilification campaign, personal attacks, and despite that we won because of social media. This is the new, had there been no social media, probably we would not have been able to beat the established parties. And since we have been in power, we are still up against the mafia. The problem has been to fix the economy, but at the same time we have had the entire opposition trying to destabilize the country. So that twice they have tried to create this uncertainty that there's been a run on the rupee. We almost had a run on the rupee because of them predicting that all fake news that IMF had told us that the rupee would go to a certain number. All wrong, but putting pressure on the economy all the time. Finally, I can say right now, after 10 months, we have finally stabilized the economy, and we feel now that after stabilizing the economy, we feel that we can now move ahead and start our reforms. Our reforms are very straightforward. We believe that real development is human development. So we are going to, all our money, we've decided that all the money which we retrieve from the criminal mafia, we've started a massive accountability campaign. We will then direct it towards human development. We've started one of the biggest poverty alleviation program in Pakistan's history, despite having financial constraints. But we believe that a country cannot rise if there's a small lot of rich people and a mass of poor ones. This is what's happened in Pakistan. The gap between the rich and the poor has grown with each year. And the whole system just caters for a tiny elite. The education system caters for just a tiny elite. To give you an example, we have a total of students coming from what are the elite schools, English medium schools, are 800,000. The children who go to government schools, they are about 33 million. And then children who go to Dini madrasas is 2.5 million. So we have three-tiered system. So the first thing our government is trying to do is to synthesize the syllabus, bring in science subjects, other subjects into Dini madrasas, which are the religious schools. So bring them into the mainstream. Similarly, in the Urdu medium schools, teach them English so that we equip them for higher education. So we're trying to bring the education system, which is the biggest problem our country faces and the most difficult problem. So that's number one. Secondly is the Pakistan taxation system. We have the lowest tax GDP ratio in the world. We have, out of a population of 210 million people, we have only taxpayer, barely people, 1.5 million people pay taxes. So there's no way you can sustain a country if you do not expand the tax base. So we now are in the process, very difficult process, convincing everyone to come into the tax net. There are a lot of strikes going on right now, but we feel that we will be able to overcome them. Because it's imperative now that the Pakistani people pay taxes. The challenge, of course, has been that this mafia, I call this mafia, in 10 years, just so that you understand what they have done to our country. Because later on, people, you might ask me, why is this political victimization? What I call accountability, people say political victimization. But I'll just tell you what they've done to our country in 10 years. The total debt of Pakistan in 2008, before these two parties came in, when General Musharraf left, the total debt of Pakistan in 60 years was 6 trillion rupees. In the last 10 years, they've taken it from 6 trillion to 30 trillion rupees. So where has this money gone? I've set up a commission, a debt commission, which is now going to find out where this money disappeared. So which is why we are going to, we are going through this problem of finding out what happened to our country. How come we got so indebted? So the problem with having such a huge debt is that in the last year, the total tax revenue which we collected, half of it went to servicing debts. So you can't have 210 million people just surviving on this already a very low tax base and then half of it going into debt servicing. So for that, we are expanding our tax base. But what we are doing now in Pakistan, it's the first time in 1960s any government is going to take this step. We are now moving towards encouraging industrialization. In 1960s, Pakistan's industrial production was equal to 4 Asian tigers' industrial production: Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Thailand. The combined industrial production was equal to Pakistan's in 1960s. After that, unfortunately, we deindustrialized. Our exports actually went down because our policies just did not encourage industrialization. So we now have embarked on a program of industrializing our country. We are giving incentives to industry. So we have, the main programs in Pakistan are, number one, poverty alleviation. We have allocated the biggest amount to alleviate poverty. Any money retrieved from these big crooks will go straight into the poverty alleviation program. Secondly, industrialization. We are now encouraging our industry, specifically export industry. We have trade agreements, one with China where we hope that we will be able to free trade agreement with, a preferential trade agreement with China, where we hope to export our stuff to China. China has imports of $2 trillion. So industrialization. And third is agriculture. Pakistan is basically an agricultural country, and we are hoping to get technology transfer from Europe, from China. Hopefully we've spoke to companies in the United States so that we can improve our yields. Pakistan has the lowest yield, one of the most productive lands, but the lowest yield. So what we hope is that this three-pronged attack, we will be able to raise Pakistan's economy, provide employment to our people, improve productivity. So this is basically where we are headed. Thank you.
Listen, बहुत busy week है. I hope you're ready.
I am हमेशा ready क्योंकि वीकडे मुझे पूरे हफ्ते के लिए silky smooth skin so that I can live, inspire, lead, play for 7 days of silky smooth skin. Just read it.
During this visit in Washington, and how do you see the future between U.S. and Pakistan?
You see, Nancy, I always felt that the relationship between Pakistan and the United States was never multi-pronged. It was basically a transactional relationship. So, for instance, in the 80s, Pakistan was fighting the jihad against the Soviets. And so the US was helping Pakistan, was providing aid. And Pakistan was, the various groups created in Pakistan were then conducting attacks inside Afghanistan against the Soviets. The moment that the Afghan jihad ended, the US packed up and left. And not only did they leave, Pakistan was slapped with Pressler sanctions. So Pakistan then was left with 4 million Afghan refugees, a number of militant groups which had been created to fight the Soviets, all dressed up and nowhere to go. We had heroin, drugs that were used at some point to pay for the fighting in Afghanistan. So Pakistan, then first time we had these sectarian attacks and sectarian militant groups, which were first time we heard of sectarian attacks inside Pakistan. Then comes 9/11, and Pakistan again joins the US. I was then, I only had one seat in Parliament at the time, and I remember when General Musharraf was consulting all of us that the US wants us to join them in the war. I opposed it. I thought Pakistan should stay neutral. And I'll tell you why I thought Pakistan should stay neutral. We had created these jihadi groups in the 80s. We had indoctrinated them in the idea of jihad. That foreign occupation in Afghanistan, it was a religious duty to fight them. So all these groups, including Al-Qaeda, had arrived in Pakistan. Now comes 9/11, then the US invades Afghanistan. And now we are trying to tell these same groups who had close links with the Pakistan army, because they were created by the Pakistan army, now we are telling them that no, it's because the good guys are there, it's no longer jihad. Now, obviously, a lot of them turned against the Pakistan army because Pakistan army was then trying to neutralize them. So what we went through, and I just briefly mentioned earlier, it was the worst time in our history. These groups turned against the Pakistan army and the state of Pakistan. And not only that, there were linkages between these groups and the Pakistani security forces, because they had created them. So we had insider attacks, we had, the GHQ was attacked, generals were killed, ISI headquarters were attacked. The army at one point, the army could not go into the cities in military clothes or with military cars. It was that bad at one point. And then, of course, the second thing was the tribal areas. We should never have sent army into the tribal areas, because the tribal area per capita was the most weaponized area in the world. For people who don't know, tribal area is the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. It was always an autonomous area. The British never occupied it during their rule since 1890. So it was an autonomous area. It ran by its own rules. So in 2004, under pressure from the United States, Pakistan army went into the tribal areas to flush out Al-Qaeda. Now, what happened was that when, after Tora Bora in Afghanistan, few of the Al-Qaeda moved into our tribal areas, which were semi-autonomous. So when they sent the army in, armies are not meant to go into civilian areas. Whenever you send your army into civilian areas, you can ensure that there will be human rights abuses, there will be collateral damage, there will be innocent people killed, because there's no army there. They're just guerrillas operating from villages. So, the collateral damage created what became the Pakistani Taliban. There was no Pakistani Taliban before. So we then had the people of tribal areas suffered. One point there were these militants, the other side was the Pakistan army. Half of the tribal area was then internally displaced. The damage, we still haven't, the amount of damage done in the tribal area, we still haven't got the resources to compensate them. So basically the country went through hell. In my opinion, we should have stayed neutral. That way we would have had control over these militant groups, and we could have in our own time neutralized them. But because we became a part of the US war, they turned against Pakistan. And so now what I feel, there was a watershed in Pakistan, in Pakistani politics. In 2014, the TTP, the Pakistani Taliban, they slaughtered 150 school children in what was called the APS, the Army Public School. There was a reaction within Pakistan. All the political parties then signed a paper called the National Action Plan. And we all decided after that we will not allow any militant groups to operate inside Pakistan. Until we came into power, the governments did not have the political will, because when you talk about the militant groups, they still have about 30 to 40,000 armed people who have been trained and in some sort of a theater, who fought either in Afghanistan, maybe in Kashmir. So we were the first government who has now started disarming all the militant groups. This is the first time it is happening. We have taken over their institutes, their seminaries. We've got administrators there. So it is the first time in Pakistan that we have decided there will be no armed militias inside our country.
Which relates to the next question I want to ask you, and it's been in the news a lot. It's clearly a significant element in US-Pakistan relationships, and that's what you referred to as well, the ongoing Afghan peace process, and the possibilities that we might actually have some breakthroughs. And building on what you just said, is the Pakistan government able and willing to make the commitments to really help move these dialogues forward, especially in the event that the Taliban and the Afghan government aren't able to get a meeting organized?
It's just for people's benefit. The fear amongst the Pakistan military establishment was always that there would be a two-front situation. So there would be, the Eastern Front, which is India, and then if Afghanistan was also in the Indian sphere of influence, then Pakistan would be sandwiched between these two. And so this was always the worry about the Pakistan military establishment, and which is why they wanted what was called the strategic depth. But this has changed. Today, there is no concept in Pakistan of strategic depth, because we feel that by interfering in Afghanistan, in order to secure the strategic depth, we have actually done a lot of damage to our own country, and for no rhyme or reason, we have become partisan in Afghanistan's internal affairs. Now, and I speak for Pakistan Army because, normally there was that, there's Pakistan Army is this independent entity, and, the governments have no control over it. I can sit here and tell you that as I speak, the Pakistan Army is exactly behind the government's program. Whatever our policies from day one we've arrived, peace with India, they were behind. When I decided to release the Indian pilot who had been shot down in Pakistan, the army was right behind me. So we today speak as, that there's no difference between the policies of the Pakistan security forces or the Pakistan's democratic government. And we believe that we should not ever interfere in the internal affairs of Afghanistan. Let the Afghans decide what they want, what sort of government they want, and we should facilitate the peace process. So this is the big difference now.
Okay.
We're all on the same page, and fortunately now that the United States is on the same page too, because, after, the Einstein's definition of madness, trying to do the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, 19 years of conflict. And if they had gone, thank God for President Trump, I mean, this could have gone on for another 19 years without any result.
But it sounds like you're willing to use your leverage with the Taliban to facilitate the peace process.
You see,
which is a big welcome change.
The Taliban delegation wanted to meet me a few months back, and when I became the Prime Minister. And it's because I always maintained that there was no military solution, while everyone else in Pakistan's political spectrum kept sort of agreeing that there was some military solution. So because of that, I had a certain amount of credibility amongst them. They wanted to meet me, but the Afghan government at that point did not want me to meet them. So I did not meet them, but now when I go back, after meeting President Trump, and also I've spoken to President Ghani, now I will meet the Taliban and I will try my best to get them to talk to the Afghan government, and so that the election in Afghanistan must be an inclusive election where the Taliban also participate in it.
Great, thanks. I want to ask something that's very important to people here. And that is the view that in Pakistan, censorship and harassment of the press, of activists and dissenting voices of women is on the rise. And you just spoke very eloquently about a new Pakistan, talked about the inequalities that have plagued the economy. And I'm curious, what are your thoughts and commitments about also protecting the pluralism and the freedom of speech and of the media that's so important to a democratic Pakistan?
Just let me say one thing. My government, and time will prove this, will be the most inclusive government in Pakistan ever. We will try, we have already now ensured full protection for our minorities. We have, I won't go into detail, but there's one element where we still have a problem. But what we have done, no government has done before. And I'll give you an example, that there was this case of Asia Bibi. She was this Christian woman who was jailed, and no judge would try them because of blasphemy. And because of the strength of one particular group, which had the previous government was held hostage by the group. They came in and they literally blocked the roads, and people were scared of that group. So when the judgment was given to free her by the Supreme Court, the same group then threatened. They came out on the streets. They were rioting for 2 days, and the stage was held hostage for 2 days. But this is the first government that on the next opportune moment actually took them out. We put them in jails. We just completely, and Asia Bibi was then safely, she came out, and then she wanted to leave the country, and we helped her. So all I'm saying is that this government you will see that it will treat its minorities as equal citizens. There is just one thing, I don't want to go into details, but there's one aspect, I can't talk about it, but we have still a problem. I'm not saying we've completely controlled the situation, but you will see that this is not out of worry about what the Western world or any other people say about us. It's because out of our conviction that our minorities, according to our religion, according to our constitution, are equal citizens. Now the media.
वज़ीर-ए-आज़म इमरान खान का ये कहना है कि आज़ाद पाकिस्तान की पहली नस्ल से ताल्लुक़ रखता हूँ, जानता हूँ आज़ाद मुल्क में आज़ादी की क्या हैसियत होती है। करप्शन के बाइस ममालिक तरक्की नहीं कर पाते, पाकिस्तान इसकी एक वाज़े मिसाल है। वज़ीर-ए-आज़म इमरान खान ने यह भी कहा कि एक दिवालिया होने के करीब था मुल्क और उस वक्त हमें ये मुल्क मिला। हुकूमत संभालने के बाद करप्शन के खात्मे का चैलेंज मिला।